Horse invades hospital and prevents euthanasia of an elderly millionaire. What happens next is shocking. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment and the soft squeaking of rubber-soled shoes on polished floors filled the air of St. Mary's Hospital. It was a typical Tuesday night in the quiet town of Millbrook, Connecticut. Nurse Sarah Johnson made her rounds, her experienced eyes scanning patient charts and monitors with practiced efficiency. As she approached the intensive care unit, Sarah's gaze lingered on room 42, where Theodore Blackwood, once a titan of industry and local legend, lay motionless. The steady rise and fall of his chest was the only sign of life, maintained by a complex array of machines. Sarah's heart ached at the sight. Despite his immense wealth, not a single visitor had crossed the threshold of his room in days. "Such a shame," she murmured, adjusting Theodore's blanket with gentle hands. "All that money, and not a soul to hold your hand." Dr. James Peterson appeared at her side, his face etched with lines of fatigue and concern. "How's he doing, Sarah?" She shook her head slightly. "No change, doctor. It's been 3 weeks now." Dr. Peterson sighed heavily, his fingers drumming against the patient chart. "I'm afraid we're running out of options. If there's no improvement by morning, we may need to consider—" A thunderous crash from the hospital's main entrance cut him off mid-sentence. The sound of shattering glass and startled screams echoed through the corridors, causing both Sarah and Dr. Peterson to jump. "What on earth?" Sarah gasped, her heart racing. Before they could react, a series of sharp clopping sounds filled the air, growing louder by the second. Rounding the corner came the most unexpected sight either of them had ever witnessed in their medical careers. A majestic black horse, its coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, was galloping down the hospital corridor. Patients and staff alike pressed themselves against the walls, mouths agape in shock as the powerful animal surged past. Security guards gave chase, their shouts of alarm only adding to the chaos. "This can't be happening," Dr. Peterson muttered, frozen in disbelief. The horse slowed as it approached the ICU, its dark eyes scanning the rooms as if searching for something or someone. To Sarah's amazement, it came to a halt directly in front of room 42, where Theodore Blackwood lay unconscious. As if drawn by an invisible force, the horse stepped closer to the glass partition, separating the room from the hallway. It lowered its head, pressing its muzzle against the cool surface, eyes fixed on the frail figure in the bed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Doctor," she whispered, "look at Mr. Blackwood's monitors." "Doctor." Peterson tore his gaze away from the horse and focused on the screens displaying Theodore's vital signs. His eyes widened in disbelief. The erratic patterns that had persisted for weeks were stabilizing, heart rate strengthening, blood pressure normalizing. "Impossible," he breathed. Security finally caught up, approaching the horse with caution. "We need to get this animal out of here," one guard said, reaching for the horse's mane. "Wait," Sarah called out, surprising even herself. I think it's helping Mr. Blackwood." The guard looked at her as if she'd lost her mind, but Dr. Peterson held up a hand. "She's right, something's happening. Let's give it a moment." As they watched in awe, Theodore's fingers twitched, the first voluntary movement he'd made in weeks. Sarah rushed into the room, hope blooming in her chest. "Mr. Blackwood," she called softly, taking his hand. "Can you hear me?" Theodore's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. His gaze, unfocused at first, gradually sharpened. He turned his head slightly, looking past Sarah to the window where the black horse still stood. A weak smile touched his lips. "Shadow," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. Sarah exchanged a bewildered glance with Dr. Peterson, who had entered the room behind her. "Mr. Blackwood, do you know this horse?" Theodore nodded weakly. "My old friend," he murmured. "But how—" Before anyone could respond, a commotion from the neighboring room caught their attention. Nurse Lisa Chen burst in, her eyes wide with excitement. "Dr. Peterson, Mr. Harrison in room 43, he's awake." Dr. Peterson's jaw dropped. "That's impossible. Mr. Harrison has been in a coma for months." As if on cue, a weak voice called out from next door. "Theo? Is that you, old friend?" Theodore's eyes lit up with recognition. William, is that you?" Sarah helped Theodore sit up slightly, allowing him to see into the next room. There, propped up in his bed, was William Harrison, Theodore's longtime friend and business partner, who had been unresponsive for the better part of a year. The horse Shadow nickered softly, drawing everyone's attention once more. It paced between the two rooms, touching its nose to each window in turn, as if connecting the two men. Dr. Peterson shook his head in disbelief. "In all my years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Theodore and William exchange weak but joyful greetings. The bond between the two men was palpable, transcending the walls that separated them. As the initial shock began to wear off, questions started to form in Sarah's mind. How had the horse known where to find Theodore? What mysterious connection did it share with these two men? And most importantly, what force had brought about this miraculous recovery? Little did Sarah know, the events of this extraordinary night were just the beginning. The arrival of Shadow had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel long-buried secrets, challenge deeply held beliefs, and ultimately remind everyone at St. Mary's Hospital of the powerful, inexplicable bonds that tie us all together. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the hospital windows, Sarah realized that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The night shift was ending, but a new chapter in all their lives was just beginning. As the sun rose over Millbrook, casting a warm glow through the hospital windows, the events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike. Yet the presence of Shadow, the majestic black horse now secured in a makeshift pen in the hospital's courtyard, served as a tangible reminder of the inexplicable occurrences that had unfolded. Sarah Johnson, having worked a double shift, found herself unable to leave. She sat in the staff lounge nursing a cup of coffee, her mind replaying the miraculous recoveries of Theodore Blackwood and William Harrison. Dr. Peterson entered, looking equally drained and bewildered. "Any changes?" Sarah asked, straightening in her chair. Dr. Peterson shook his head, a mix of awe and confusion etched on his face. "They're both stable, improving even. I've ordered a full battery of tests, but so far I can't explain it. It's as if they've been given a second lease on life." Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to the window where she could see Shadow grazing peacefully. "And the horse?" "Animal control is at a loss," Dr. Peterson sighed. "No reports of missing horses in the area. It's like it appeared out of thin air." Their conversation was interrupted by Lisa Chen, who burst into the lounge, excitement radiating from her. "You won't believe this," she exclaimed. "Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Harrison are asking to see each other, and the horse." Sarah and Dr. Peterson exchanged glances before hurrying to the ICU. They found both men sitting up in their beds, a far cry from their comatose states just hours before. The change was nothing short of miraculous. Theodore Blackwood, his voice stronger now, was the first to speak as they entered. "Doctor, please. We need to see Shadow." Dr. Peterson hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Harrison, while your recoveries are remarkable, I'm not sure it's wise to—" "James," William Harrison interjected, using the doctor's first name with the casual authority of a man used to getting his way. "That horse out there isn't just any animal. He's a link to our past, a past we thought was lost forever." Curiosity piqued, Sarah stepped forward. "What do you mean, Mr. Harrison?" Theodore and William exchanged a look laden with years of shared history. Theodore sighed, his eyes misting with memory. "Shadow was more than just a horse to us. He was a confidant, a friend. We raised him from a colt 30 years ago on our ranch in Wyoming." William nodded, picking up the thread of the story. "Those were different times. Theo and I were young, ambitious. We'd just started our company, and the stress was overwhelming. Shadow, he became our escape." As the two men spoke, their words painted a vivid picture of days gone by. They described long rides through sprawling fields, the thunder of hooves matching the beating of their hearts. Shadow, they explained, had an almost supernatural ability to sense their moods, to offer comfort with a gentle nuzzle or invigorate them with a spirited gallop. "But how is he here now?" Sarah asked, voicing the question on everyone's minds. "After all these years?" Theodore's brow furrowed. "That's the thing, Shadow. He passed away 15 years ago. Or at least we thought he did." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of Theodore's words sank in. Dr. Peterson, ever the pragmatist, opened his mouth to argue, but William raised a hand to stop him. "We know how it sounds," William said softly. "Believe me, we do. But after what happened last night, can you really say it's impossible, Doctor?" Peterson ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling with the concept. Even if what you're suggesting is true, it doesn't explain your recoveries. The medical implications are extraordinary, Theodore finished for him. We know. That's why we need to see him to understand. After a moment of internal debate, Dr. Peterson nodded. All right, but we do this carefully. You're both still recovering and I won't risk your health. With meticulous care, Theodore and William were transferred to wheelchairs. Sarah and Lisa pushed them gently through the corridors, followed closely by Dr. Peterson. As they approached the courtyard, a palpable tension filled the air. The moment Shadow came into view, both men gasped. Tears welled in Theodore's eyes as he extended a trembling hand. It's really him, he whispered. Shadow, as if sensing their presence, lifted his head and turned towards them. With graceful steps, he approached, stopping just short of the small group. He lowered his head, allowing Theodore to stroke his muzzle. Hey there, old friend, Theodore murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You came back for us, didn't you? As Theodore and William reconnected with Shadow, Sarah noticed something peculiar. The horse's presence seemed to invigorate the two men. Their postures straightened, color returned to their cheeks, and an almost visible energy passed between them and the animal. Dr. Peterson noticed it too. He pulled out a small medical device from his pocket and began taking readings. His eyes widened as he looked at the results. This is unprecedented, he muttered. Sarah leaned in, curious. What is it, doctor? They're vital signs, he replied, shaking his head in disbelief. They're not just stable, they're improving by the minute. It's as if Shadow is healing them, Sarah finished, her voice barely above a whisper. As the group stood in awe of the unfolding miracle, none of them noticed the figure watching from a second-floor window. Nurse Rachel Evans, her face a mask of concern and calculation, observed the scene below. Her hand tightened around her phone, a half-composed text message glowing on the screen. It's happening. The old men are awake, and you won't believe what brought them back. Rachel's thumb hovered over the send button, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd witnessed. Whatever was happening here was bigger than she'd anticipated, much bigger, and someone needed to know. As Shadow continued to nuzzle Theodore and William, and the medical staff looked on in amazement, the stage was set for a story that would challenge the boundaries between science and faith, life and death, past and present. In the quiet courtyard of St. Mary's Hospital, a new chapter was unfolding, one that would change all their lives forever. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across St. Mary's Hospital courtyard, the miraculous reunion between Theodore, William and Shadow continued to unfold. The medical staff watched in amazement as the two elderly men, who had been at death's door mere hours ago, now sat up straighter in their wheelchairs, their eyes bright with renewed vitality. Dr. Peterson, still grappling with the inexplicable nature of their recovery, approached the group with a clipboard in hand. Gentlemen, he began, his voice a mix of professional concern and undeniable curiosity. I hate to interrupt, but we really should get you both back to your rooms for a thorough examination. Theodore looked up, his hand still resting on Shadow's muzzle. Just a few more minutes, Doctor, please. William nodded in agreement. We have so much to catch up on. Sarah, who had been observing the scene with rapt attention, noticed a flicker of movement from the hospital building. Glancing up, she caught sight of Nurse Rachel Evans quickly stepping away from a second-floor window. Something about Rachel's furtive behavior sent a chill down Sarah's spine. As if sensing her unease, Shadow lifted his head, ears pricked forward, eyes scanning the hospital facade. The horse nickered softly, drawing Theodore and William's attention. What is it, old boy? Theodore asked, following Shadow's gaze. Before anyone could respond, Lisa Chen approached the group, her face etched with concern. Dr. Peterson, there's a situation inside. The hospital administrator is asking for you. Something about media inquiries. Dr. Peterson sighed heavily. I suppose it was only a matter of time. Sarah, can you help get Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Harrison back to their rooms? I'll be there as soon as I can. As Dr. Peterson hurried off, Sarah began to maneuver Theodore's wheelchair towards the hospital entrance. Lisa followed with William, while two orderlies were tasked with guiding Shadow back to his makeshift pen. I don't understand, William mused as they made their way through the corridors. How did Shadow find us after all these years? Theodore shook his head, his brow furrowed in contemplation. I'm not sure, old friend, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than we realize. Sarah, pushing Theodore's chair, couldn't help but agree. The events of the past 12 hours defied logical explanation, and yet the evidence of a miracle was right before her eyes. As they approached the ICU, Sarah noticed Rachel Evans standing at the nurse's station, engaged in a hushed phone conversation. Upon seeing the group, Rachel quickly ended her call, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome back," Rachel greeted, her voice overly cheerful. "Let's get you settled in your room, shall we?" Something about Rachel's demeanor struck Sarah as off, but she pushed the thought aside, focusing on getting Theodore and William comfortable in their beds. Once the two men were settled, Sarah began taking their vital signs, marveling at the dramatic improvement in their conditions. As she worked, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. "Do you remember that summer, Theo?" William asked, his voice low and nostalgic. "The one when we found the old mine?" Theodore's eyes widened slightly. "William, perhaps now isn't the best time to—" "Oh, come now," William chuckled. "It's ancient history. Besides, it's not like anyone would believe us anyway." Sarah's curiosity was piqued, but she maintained a professional demeanor, pretending not to listen as she checked Theodore's blood pressure. "It was Shadow who found it, wasn't it?" Theodore mused after a moment. "Led us right to the entrance as if he knew exactly where to go." William nodded. "And what we found inside, it changed everything." Before Theodore could respond, Dr. Peterson returned, looking harried. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a situation on our hands. Somehow, word of your remarkable recovery has leaked to the press. They're clamoring for information, and we need to decide how to proceed." The atmosphere in the room shifted, tension crackling in the air. Theodore and William exchanged a loaded glance, years of unspoken history passing between them. "James," Theodore began, addressing the doctor, "what happened here last night? It's more complicated than you can imagine. We need time to figure things out before we go public with any of this." Dr. Peterson looked conflicted. "I understand your desire for privacy, but this is unprecedented from a medical standpoint. The implications for research, for treatment, could be dangerous if mishandled," William interjected firmly. "We've seen firsthand what can happen when certain things fall into the wrong hands." Sarah, who had been listening intently, couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "What exactly are you talking about? What did you find in that mine?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Sarah. She felt a blush creep up her neck, realizing she had overstepped. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." Theodore sighed, sharing another look with William before speaking. "It's all right, Sarah. You've been nothing but kind to us. The truth is, what we discovered all those years ago, it was something that defied explanation. Something that blurred the lines between science and, well, something else entirely." William nodded solemnly. "We made a pact to keep it secret, for the good of everyone. But now with Shadow's return and our miraculous recovery, I fear that secret may be in jeopardy." As if on cue, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices and the sound of hurried footsteps approached the room. Dr. Peterson moved to the door, peering out with concern. "It's the press," he said, turning back to the group. "They've managed to get past security. We need to make a decision, and fast." Theodore straightened in his bed, a determined look in his eyes. "Then it's time we face this head-on, but on our terms." William nodded in agreement. "Together, old friend. Just like always." As Dr. Peterson stepped out to hold off the encroaching media frenzy, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The mystery surrounding Theodore, William, and Shadow deepened with each passing moment, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Outside the window, Shadow paced in his pen, his dark eyes fixed on the hospital building. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what secrets the coming days would reveal and what consequences they might bring. In the corridor, Rachel Evans slipped away unnoticed, her hand clutching her phone tightly. The message she had been composing earlier was now complete and sent. "It's worse than we thought. They remember everything. We need to move quickly." As the hospital buzzed with anticipation and uncertainty, the stage was set for revelations that would shake the very foundations of what everyone thought they knew about life, death, and the mysterious forces that connect them all. The following morning dawned with an air of expectancy hanging over St. Mary's Hospital. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metal sunflowers. Inside, an uneasy calm pervaded the corridors as staff and patients alike waited for the storm to break. In a hastily arranged conference room, Theodore Blackwood and William Harrison sat side by side, their postures straight and expressions resolute. Dr. Peterson stood nearby, alternating between checking his watch and peering out the window at the media circus below. Sarah Johnson, having been asked to attend due to her involvement in the events, sat quietly in a corner, her mind racing with questions. The door opened, and Hospital Administrator Victoria Reeves entered, her sharp suit and no-nonsense demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Gentlemen," Victoria began, taking a seat across from Theodore and William, "I hope you understand the position we're in. The press is demanding answers, and frankly, so am I. What happened last night defies medical explanation." Theodore leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Ms. Reeves, we appreciate the difficult situation this has put the hospital in, but what we're about to share with you, it goes beyond medicine, beyond science as we know it." William nodded, picking up the thread. "We've spent decades keeping this secret, for good reason, but circumstances have forced our hand." Victoria's eyebrow arched skeptically. "I'm listening." Theodore took a deep breath, his eyes meeting William's briefly before he began. 30 years ago, William and I were young entrepreneurs, full of ambition, but overwhelmed by the pressures of our fledgling business. We bought a ranch in Wyoming as a retreat, a place to clear our heads. William continued, "That's where we got Shadow. Raising him, riding him, it became our escape. But one day, everything changed." As Theodore and William took turns narrating their tale, Sarah found herself drawn into a story that seemed more suited to science fiction than reality. They spoke of a day when Shadow, spooked by a sudden storm, had bolted into the wilderness with Theodore and William in pursuit. The chase led them deep into unexplored territory, to the mouth of an old, abandoned mine. "Shadow refused to leave," Theodore explained, his voice hushed with the weight of memory. "It was as if he knew something was in there. Something important." William picked up the narrative. "We ventured inside, and that's when we found it. A chamber hidden deep within the mountain. And in that chamber," he paused, looking to Theodore, who nodded encouragingly. "In that chamber," William continued, "we discovered what can only be described as a nexus of energy, a swirling, pulsing light that defied all logical explanation." Dr. Peterson, who had been listening intently, couldn't contain himself. "Are you suggesting you found some sort of supernatural phenomenon?" Theodore shook his head. "Not supernatural, Doctor. Just beyond our current scientific understanding. This energy, it responded to us, to our thoughts, our emotions. And more importantly, it had profound effects on living organisms. Effects like miraculous healing," Sarah interjected, unable to stay silent any longer. Both men turned to her, nodding solemnly. "Exactly," William confirmed. "We conducted experiments in secret over the years. The energy could heal, rejuvenate, even seemingly reverse aging in plants and animals. But it was unpredictable, sometimes dangerous." Victoria Reeves, who had been listening with growing disbelief, finally spoke up. This is insane. You expect us to believe this fairy tale?" Theodore's expression hardened. "Ms. Reeves, look at us. Yesterday we were on death's door. Today we're healthier than we've been in years. How do you explain that?" Before Victoria could respond, a commotion outside the room caught everyone's attention. The door burst open, and a breathless nurse rushed in. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she panted, "but you need to see this. It's the horse, Shadow. He's glowing." The room erupted into chaos as everyone rushed to the windows. Sure enough, in the courtyard below, Shadow stood in his makeshift pen, his coat emanating a soft, pulsing light that seemed to ripple across his body. "My God," Dr. Peterson whispered, his face pale with shock. Theodore and William exchanged knowing looks. "It's happening again," Theodore murmured. As they watched, mesmerized, Shadow reared up on his hind legs, letting out a piercing neigh that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the hospital. In that moment, every electronic device in the building flickered, lights dimming momentarily before surging back to life. Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation course through her body, and judging by the gasps around her, she wasn't alone. It was as if a wave of energy had washed over them all, leaving them breathless and oddly invigorated. In the stunned silence that followed, William turned to the group, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Now do you believe us?" Victoria Reeves, her composure thoroughly shaken, could only nod mutely. Theodore's voice cut through the tension. "What you've just experienced is only a fraction of what we discovered, but it's also why we've kept it secret all these years. In the wrong hands, this power could be catastrophic. Dr. Peterson, still staring out the window at the now normal-looking shadow, spoke up. "But why now? Why has this all come to light after so many years?" Before either Theodore or William could answer, Sarah's attention was drawn to movement in the corridor outside. Through the glass panel in the door, she caught a glimpse of Nurse Rachel Evans hurrying past, her face set in grim determination as she spoke urgently into her phone. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she recalled Rachel's suspicious behavior the day before. Somehow she knew that Rachel's actions were connected to the unfolding mystery. As if sensing her unease, Theodore turned to Sarah, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What is it, my dear? You look troubled." Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to voice her suspicions. But as she opened her mouth to speak, a sudden explosion rocked the building, sending everyone stumbling. Alarms blared as smoke began to fill the corridor outside. Through the chaos, Sarah heard William's voice, tight with fear and realization. "They've found us. God help us all. They've finally found us." As panic set in and people rushed to evacuate, Sarah found herself at the center of a mystery far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Whatever secrets lay hidden in that long-ago mine, whatever power Shadow possessed, it was clear that forces beyond their control were now in play. And in the courtyard below, Shadow reared again, his coat shimmering with otherworldly light, as if preparing for a battle only he could see coming. Chaos reigned in the halls of St. Mary's Hospital. As smoke billowed through the corridors and the shrill sound of alarms pierced the air, amidst the panicked shouts and hurried footsteps of evacuation, Sarah Johnson found herself swept along in a tide of fear and confusion. "This way!" Dr. Peterson shouted over the din, guiding Theodore and William towards the emergency stairwell. Sarah followed close behind, her mind racing to make sense of the rapidly unfolding events. As they descended the stairs, William turned to Theodore, his face etched with worry. "They've found us, Theo. After all these years, they've finally tracked us down." Theodore nodded grimly. "We always knew this day might come, old friend. We need to get to Shadow." Sarah, her curiosity overcoming her fear, couldn't help but ask, "Who are they? What's really going on here?" Before either man could answer, Victoria Reeves cut in, her composure regained despite the chaos. "I think we all deserve some answers now, gentlemen. Who exactly is after you and why?" Theodore sighed heavily as they reached the ground floor. "It's a long story, but the short version is this. We're not the only ones who know about the energy source we discovered. There are interested parties who've been searching for it for years." "Interested parties?" Dr. Peterson echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. William nodded solemnly. "Government agencies, private corporations, individuals with vast resources, all seeking to harness the power we found for their own ends. We've been hiding from them, protecting the secret, for decades." As they pushed through the emergency exit into the courtyard, Sarah's eyes widened in shock. The previously peaceful area had been transformed into a scene of bedlam. Hospital staff and patients milled about in confusion, while in the distance, the wail of approaching sirens grew louder. And there, at the center of it all, stood Shadow. The horse's coat still shimmered with an otherworldly glow, his eyes alert and focused on something beyond the hospital gates. "We need to get Shadow out of here," Theodore declared, his voice firm with resolve. Victoria shook her head in disbelief. "You can't be serious. We're in the middle of an emergency evacuation." But Sarah, her instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong, found herself siding with Theodore and William. "I think they're right," she said, surprising herself with her conviction. "Whatever's happening, that horse seems to be at the center of it." As if in response to her words, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt just outside the hospital grounds. Men in dark suits poured out, their movements precise and purposeful. "It's them," William whispered, his face pale. Theodore turned to Sarah, his eyes pleading. "We need your help, my dear. We can't explain everything now, but please trust us. We have to protect Shadow and the secret he represents." Sarah hesitated for a split second, her gaze darting between the approaching men, the glowing horse, and the desperate faces of Theodore and William. In that moment, she made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. "All right," she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Relief washed over Theodore's face. "Thank you. First, we need a distraction." As if on cue, Dr. Peterson stepped forward. "I'll handle that. Victoria, we need to coordinate with emergency services and manage the evacuation. That should keep everyone occupied." Victoria looked like she wanted to protest, but the gravity of the situation seemed to sink in. She nodded curtly and followed Dr. Peterson towards the gathering crowd of first responders. With the hospital staff occupied, Sarah helped Theodore and William make their way to Shadow's pen. The horse nickered softly as they approached, the glow of his coat intensifying. "Easy, old friend," Theodore murmured, stroking Shadow's muzzle. "We need to leave now." Sarah's heart raced as she helped the two elderly men mount the horse, marveling at how they seemed to move with renewed strength and agility. Once they were settled, Theodore extended his hand to her. "Come with us, Sarah," he urged. "I'm afraid you're involved now, whether you like it or not. We can protect you, but only if you come with us." Sarah hesitated, her mind whirling with the implications of what she was about to do, but as she caught sight of the men in suits pushing their way through the crowd towards them, she made her choice. Grasping Theodore's hand, she swung herself up onto Shadow's back behind William. The moment she was seated, a jolt of energy surged through her body, as if Shadow's glow had somehow transferred to her. "Hold on tight," William warned, and with a gentle nudge, Shadow broke into a gallop. They burst through the hospital gates, weaving through the chaos of emergency vehicles and startled onlookers. Sarah heard shouts behind them, the sound of running feet and car engines roaring to life. As they raced through the streets of Millbrook, Shadow's hooves barely seeming to touch the ground, Sarah caught glimpses of their pursuers in the side mirrors of parked cars. The black SUV was in hot pursuit. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the wind rushing past them. "Somewhere safe," Theodore called back. "Somewhere they can't follow." As they reached the outskirts of town, Shadow veered off the road and into a dense patch of forest. The trees blurred around them as the horse navigated the uneven terrain with impossible speed and grace. Suddenly, the air ahead of them seemed to shimmer and distort. Sarah blinked, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. But as Shadow galloped forward, the distortion grew more pronounced. "What's happening?" she cried out, tightening her grip on William's waist. "Hold on," Theodore shouted. "We're going through." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Shadow leapt forward into the shimmering air. For a moment, she felt as if she were falling through space, her body tingling with the same energy she'd felt when Shadow had glowed in the hospital courtyard. And then, in the blink of an eye, the world around them changed. The dense forest was gone, replaced by a vast open landscape that seemed to glow with an inner light. Rolling hills covered in grass that shimmered like starlight stretched as far as the eye could see, and in the distance, a structure that looked like a cross between a futuristic research facility and an ancient temple loomed against the horizon. As Shadow slowed to a trot, Sarah's mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Where are we?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Theodore turned to her, a mix of relief and apprehension on his face. "Welcome, Sarah, to the place where it all began, the source of the energy that changed our lives forever." William nodded solemnly. "And now, my dear, it's time you learned the whole truth. About Shadow, about us, and about the power that some would tear the world apart to possess." As Shadow carried them towards the mysterious structure, Sarah realized that her life would never be the same. She had stepped through a doorway into a world of secrets, power, and danger. A world she never knew existed, but one she now found herself irrevocably part of. The adventure that had begun with a horse in a hospital was only the beginning. As the shimmering landscape unfolded before her, Sarah steeled herself for whatever revelations and challenges lay ahead, knowing that the fate of far more than just herself now hung in the balance. As Shadow trotted towards the enigmatic structure on the horizon, Sarah's mind reeled with questions. The landscape around them seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the grass beneath Shadow's hooves emitting a soft starlight glow with each step. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice tinged with awe and confusion. "What is this place? How did we get here?" Theodore turned to her, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "This, my dear Sarah, is what we call the Nexus. It's a realm that exists parallel to our own, accessible only through specific energy gateways." William nodded, adding, "The mine we discovered all those years ago was one such gateway. And Shadow, well, he's become a key of sorts, able to open doors between the worlds when necessary." As they approached the structure, Sarah could see it more clearly. It was an architectural marvel, seamlessly blending futuristic design with what appeared to be ancient, almost mystical elements. Crystal spires reached towards the sky, while intricate, glowing symbols adorned the walls. Shadow came to a halt at the base of a grand staircase leading up to the entrance. As they dismounted, Sarah noticed figures emerging from the building, people dressed in flowing robes of iridescent fabric that seemed to shift colors with each movement. "Welcome back, Guardians," one of the figures said, bowing slightly to Theodore and William. His gaze then turned to Sarah, curiosity evident in his eyes. "And who might this be?" Theodore placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This is Sarah Johnson. She's become involved in our situation. Sarah, meet Ilara, the chief keeper of the Nexus." Ilara smiled warmly at Sarah, but there was an undercurrent of concern in her voice as she addressed Theodore and William. "Your return is unexpected. Has something happened in the other realm?" William's expression grew grave. "They found us, Ilara, the Seekers. We had to flee and, well, circumstances forced our hand in bringing Sarah here." Ilara's brow furrowed with worry. "This is troubling news indeed. Come, we must convene the council immediately." As they followed Ilara into the structure, Sarah's senses were overwhelmed. The interior was vast, with soaring ceilings and corridors that seemed to bend and shift as they walked. Everywhere there were signs of advanced technology, seamlessly integrated with natural elements. Living plants that served as data displays, water features that appeared to defy gravity. They entered a circular chamber where several other robed figures were already gathered. At the center of the room was a holographic projection of what Sarah recognized as Earth, surrounded by swirling patterns of energy. "Now," Ilara said, turning to face them, "tell us everything." Over the next hour, Theodore and William recounted the events at the hospital, Shadow's appearance, their miraculous recovery, and the attack that forced their escape. Sarah listened, adding details where she could, still struggling to process the reality of her situation. As the tale unfolded, the council members exchanged worried glances. When Theodore finished speaking, a tense silence fell over the room. Finally, one of the council members, an elderly woman with silver hair, spoke up. "The balance is shifting. The energy patterns have been unstable for months, but this could tip the scales." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "What balance? What scales?" Ilara turned to her, her expression serious. "Sarah, what you must understand is that the energy that flows through this realm, the same energy that healed Theodore and William, it's not just power. It's the life force that connects all living things across all realms." William nodded, picking up the explanation. "For centuries, the keepers of the Nexus have maintained the balance of this energy, ensuring it flows naturally between worlds. But there have always been those who sought to harness it for their own gain. The Seekers," Theodore added grimly. "A shadowy organization that's been hunting for the source of this power for decades. If they were to gain control of it, the consequences would be catastrophic," Ilara finished. "Imagine a world where the very fabric of life could be manipulated at will, where the lines between life and death become blurred. The potential for abuse is unimaginable." Sarah's mind whirled with the implications. "But why me? Why am I here?" Theodore and William exchanged a look before Theodore spoke. "Because, my dear, you've been touched by the energy. When Shadow healed us, you were there. You're connected now, whether you realize it or not." As if to emphasize his point, Sarah noticed a faint glow emanating from her own skin, similar to the aura that surrounded Shadow. Ilara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "There's more. The prophecies speak of a time when an outsider would be brought to the Nexus, one who would play a crucial role in maintaining the balance." Sarah's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. I'm just a nurse from Connecticut. I'm not special." William smiled gently. But you are, Sarah. Your compassion, your quick thinking, your willingness to help us despite the danger, these are the qualities of a true guardian. Before Sarah could protest further, alarms began to blare throughout the chamber. The holographic display at the center of the room flickered, showing a disturbance at one of the energy gateways. "It's them," Theodore said, his voice tight with tension. "The Seekers. They found a way to follow us." Ilara's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we must prepare. Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but we need your help. The choice is yours, but know that the fate of both our worlds may hang in the balance." As the council burst into action around her, Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She looked at Theodore and William, at Shadow, who stood watchfully by the door, and at the swirling representation of Earth in the center of the room. In that moment, Sarah Johnson, once just a dedicated nurse from a small town, realized that her life had irrevocably changed. She was standing at the precipice of an adventure beyond her wildest imagination, with the power to make a difference on a scale she never thought possible. Taking a deep breath, Sarah squared her shoulders and met Ilara's gaze. "What do you need me to do?" As the alarms continued to blare and the council prepared for the impending confrontation, Sarah knew that the real adventure and the real challenges were only just beginning. The shimmering realm of the Nexus held secrets and dangers beyond her comprehension, but she was determined to face them head-on, wherever this extraordinary journey might lead. As alarms echoed through the crystalline halls of the Nexus, Sarah found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Council members rushed to and fro, their robes shimmering with an urgency that matched the pulsing red lights flashing across holographic displays. Ilara's voice cut through the chaos, commanding and clear. "We must secure the gateway. Theodore, William, your experience with the Seekers is crucial. Join our defense team at the eastern portal." The two men nodded, a familiar determination settling over their features. Before they left, Theodore turned to Sarah, grasping her hand. "Stay close to Ilara. Trust your instincts. You're more prepared for this than you know." As Theodore and William hurried away, Ilara guided Sarah to a raised platform in the center of the room. The holographic display expanded, showing a three-dimensional map of the Nexus and its surrounding energy fields. "The Seekers are attempting to force their way through here," Ilara explained, pointing to a pulsing red spot on the map. "Their technology has advanced, but they still don't fully understand the nature of the energy they're dealing with." Sarah watched in fascination as glowing lines representing energy flows shifted and swirled across the display. Suddenly, she noticed a pattern, a rhythm to the energy's movement that seemed almost familiar. "It's like a heartbeat," she murmured, almost to herself. Ilara looked at her sharply. "What did you say?" Sarah blinked, surprised by the intensity of Ilara's reaction. "The energy. Its flow. It reminds me of a heartbeat, or maybe a pulse. See how it ebbs and flows?" A smile spread across Ilara's face. "You see it, just as the prophecy foretold. Sarah, your background as a nurse, your innate understanding of the rhythms of life, this is why you're here." Before Sarah could process this revelation, a violent tremor shook the chamber. On the display, the red spot representing the Seekers' incursion flared brightly. "They're breaking through," someone shouted. Ilara gripped Sarah's shoulders, her eyes intense. "Sarah, we need your help. The energy responds to intention and understanding. Your perspective, seeing it as a living pulse, could be the key to repelling this invasion." Sarah's mind reeled. "But what can I do? I don't have any special powers, or—" "You don't need them," Ilara interrupted. "Just focus on the energy, feel its rhythm. Imagine it as the pulse of a patient you're trying to stabilize." Taking a deep breath, Sarah closed her eyes. She thought back to her years of training, the countless times she'd monitored vital signs, felt for pulses, listened to heartbeats. Slowly, she became aware of the energy around her, not just seeing it on a display, but feeling it thrumming through the air, through her very being. As she focused, Sarah sensed a disturbance, like an arrhythmia in the energy's flow. Instinctively, she reached out with her mind, trying to soothe and regulate the disruption. To her amazement, she felt the energy respond. The chaotic pulses began to smooth out, falling into a more natural rhythm. Sarah opened her eyes to see the holographic display changing. The red spot of the incursion was fading, pushed back by waves of blue-green light. Ilara's voice was filled with awe. "You're doing it, Sarah. You're helping to stabilize the gateway." Encouraged, Sarah redoubled her efforts. She envisioned the energy as a vast, interconnected circulatory system with the nexus as its heart. Gently but firmly, she guided the flow, strengthening the barriers against the seeker's intrusion. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Sarah maintained her focus. Sweat beaded on her brow, and she felt a deep fatigue settling into her bones. But she persevered, driven by an instinct she couldn't fully explain. Finally, with a last surge of effort, Sarah felt the gateway seal. The red spot on the display winked out entirely, replaced by the steady, pulsing blue-green of the stabilized energy field. As cheers erupted around the chamber, Sarah's knees buckled. Ilara caught her before she could fall, easing her into a nearby chair. "You did it," Ilara said softly, her eyes shining with pride and something akin to wonder. "You turned the tide." Sarah, breathless and exhausted, could barely comprehend what had just happened. I don't understand. How did I do that?" Before Ilara could answer, Theodore and William burst into the room, their faces flushed with exertion but beaming with triumph. "The Seekers have retreated," William announced. "Whatever you did here, it worked." "The gateway is secure." Theodore approached Sarah, kneeling beside her chair. "My dear, you were magnificent. I knew you had it in you." As the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, questions flooded Sarah's mind. "But what exactly did I do? And why me? There's so much I don't understand about all of this." Ilara exchanged glances with Theodore and William before addressing the room at large. "The immediate crisis has passed, but our work is far from over. The Seekers will return, and we must be prepared." Turning back to Sarah, her expression softened. "You've taken your first steps into a larger world, Sarah. There is much for you to learn, and much for us to discuss, but for now, rest. You've earned it." As Sarah was led to a quiet chamber to recover, her mind whirled with the implications of what had transpired. She had connected with the very essence of life itself, guided it, protected it. The enormity of it all was almost too much to comprehend. Yet as she drifted off into an exhausted sleep, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Seekers were still out there, and the balance of energy, the very fabric of life across multiple realms, remained in jeopardy. In the quiet of her room, Shadow appeared, nuzzling her hand gently. As Sarah stroked his muzzle, feeling the warmth and energy that radiated from him, she knew that her life had changed forever. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets still remained to be uncovered, Sarah was now an integral part of this fantastic, dangerous, and awe-inspiring new world. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was a mix of trepidation and exhilaration. The adventure that had begun with a mysterious horse in a Connecticut hospital had now expanded beyond her wildest dreams. And somehow, improbably, she found herself at the very heart of it all. Sarah awoke to the soft glow of bioluminescent plants that lined the walls of her chamber. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it all: the hospital, the chase, the shimmering realm of the Nexus. But as she sat up, feeling the lingering fatigue in her muscles and the unfamiliar hum of energy in the air around her, she knew it was all real. A gentle knock at the door preceded Ilara's entrance. The keeper's serene face bore a mixture of concern and curiosity as she approached Sarah's bed. "How are you feeling?" Ilara asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Sarah took a deep breath, assessing herself. "Tired but different, like I'm more aware of everything around me. Is that normal?" Ilara smiled. "Your connection to the energy of the Nexus is growing stronger. What you're feeling is your heightened perception of the life force that flows through all things." As Sarah absorbed this information, her mind turned to the events of the previous day. The Seekers. Who are they exactly? And why are they so desperate to control this energy? Ilara's expression grew somber. The Seekers are a group that formed decades ago, originally as a secret society of scientists and mystics seeking to unlock the mysteries of the universe. But as they discovered traces of the energy that connects our realms, their goals became more ambitious. She stood, gesturing for Sarah to follow. As they walked through the corridors of the Nexus, Ilara continued her explanation. They believe that by harnessing the energy, they can reshape reality itself, cure all diseases, end aging, even conquer death. But they don't understand the delicate balance that must be maintained. Their actions threaten not just our world, but all realms connected by the energy. They entered a vast library, its shelves filled with books, scrolls, and crystalline data storage devices that glowed with an inner light. Theodore and William were there, poring over ancient texts with several other keepers. Theodore looked up as they entered, his face lighting up at the sight of Sarah. "Ah, our hero awakens. How are you feeling, my dear?" Sarah managed a small smile. "Still processing everything, to be honest. But I want to help. I need to understand more about what's happening and what I can do." William nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. We've been researching the prophecies, trying to understand more about your role in all of this." One of the keepers, an elderly man with kind eyes, stepped forward with an open book in his hands. "We believe we've found something relevant. It speaks of a healer from beyond who would come to the Nexus in a time of great peril." Sarah peered at the text, its strange symbols shifting and changing before her eyes until they formed words she could understand. She read aloud, "When the balance falters and shadows encroach, a healer from beyond the veil shall approach. With hands that mend and a heart that's true, she'll bridge the gap between old world and new. The horse of twilight shall be her guide, in realms of starlight where secrets reside." As Sarah finished reading, a hush fell over the room. The words seemed to hang in the air, laden with significance. Ilara broke the silence. "The horse of twilight. That must be Shadow. He's been more than just a companion to Theodore and William. He's a guardian of the energy, able to traverse the boundaries between realms." Theodore nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "We always knew Shadow was special, from the moment we found him as a colt, but we never imagined the true extent of his importance." Sarah's mind was reeling. "But me? A healer from beyond? I'm just a nurse from Connecticut. How can I possibly be part of some ancient prophecy?" William placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, what you did yesterday, stabilizing the energy, repelling the seekers, that was no small feat. Your ability to perceive and interact with the energy is unlike anything we've seen before." As if on cue, Shadow appeared in the doorway of the library, his coat shimmering with subdued starlight. He approached Sarah, nuzzling her hand gently. Suddenly, Sarah was hit with a vivid series of images, flashes of memory that weren't her own. She saw Theodore and William as young men, discovering the entrance to the mine. She felt Shadow's fear and excitement as he led them deeper into the earth. And then, a blinding light, a surge of energy that changed everything. Gasping, Sarah stumbled back, steadied by Ilara's quick grasp. What was that?" Theodore's eyes widened. "You saw it, didn't you? Our discovery of the gateway. Shadow shared his memories with you." Ilara's voice was filled with awe. "The bond between you and Shadow is growing stronger. This is further proof of your unique connection to the energy of the Nexus." As Sarah tried to process this new development, alarms began to sound throughout the complex. A young keeper burst into the library, his face pale with urgency. "The Seekers!" he exclaimed. "They've launched simultaneous attacks on multiple gateways. Our defenses are stretched thin." Ilara's expression hardened with resolve. "We must act quickly. Sarah, we need your help again. Are you ready?" Sarah looked around at the faces turned toward her. Ilara's determination, Theodore and William's encouragement, and the hope shining in the eyes of the other keepers. She thought of the world she'd left behind, of the patients she'd cared for, of the oath she'd taken to heal and protect. Drawing a deep breath, Sarah squared her shoulders and met Ilara's gaze. "I'm ready. Tell me what I need to do." As they rushed from the library, Sarah felt a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She didn't fully understand her role in this cosmic drama, but she knew one thing for certain. She would do everything in her power to protect the delicate balance of life that spanned across realms. With Shadow at her side and her newfound allies around her, Sarah prepared to face the greatest challenge of her life. The fate of multiple worlds hung in the balance, and somehow improbably, she found herself at the center of it all. As they raced towards the control chamber, Sarah silently vowed to honor the trust placed in her. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever secrets still remained to be uncovered, she would face them with courage, compassion, and the healing spirit that had guided her all her life. The battle for the very essence of life itself was about to begin, and Sarah Johnson, nurse, healer, and now guardian of the Nexus, was ready to play her part. The control chamber of the Nexus pulsed with frantic energy as Sarah, Ilara, Theodore, and William rushed in. Holographic displays flickered with alarming red indicators, showing multiple breaches across the energy gateways. "The Seekers have launched a coordinated attack," a keeper announced, his fingers flying over a crystal console. "They're using some kind of resonance technology to destabilize the gateways." Ilara's face was grim as she surveyed the situation. "They're trying to force a total collapse of the energy barriers between realms. If they succeed, everything we know could be destroyed," Theodore finished, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. Sarah stepped forward, her heart racing but her resolve firm. "What can I do? How can I help?" Ilara guided her to the central platform, where a swirling vortex of energy pulsed in mid-air. "This is the heart of the Nexus, the focal point of all the energy that flows between realms. You need to connect with it just as you did before, but this time on a much larger scale." William placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Remember what you learned, Sarah. Feel the pulse of the energy. Guide it, nurture it." Taking a deep breath, Sarah closed her eyes and reached out with her senses. Immediately, she was overwhelmed by the vastness of the energy network. It was like trying to monitor the vital signs of an entire planet. No, multiple planets, multiple realms all at once. For a moment, panic threatened to overtake her. But then she felt a familiar presence. Shadow had entered the chamber, his quiet strength a balm to her frayed nerves. Drawing courage from his presence, Sarah refocused her efforts. She envisioned the energy as a vast, interconnected web of life. Where the Seekers attacked, she could feel jagged disruptions like wounds in the fabric of reality itself. Instinctively, she began to treat these wounds, soothing the chaotic energies and guiding them back into harmony. As Sarah worked, she became aware of other presences joining her efforts. Theodore and William, their years of experience with the energy lending strength to her actions. Ilara and the other keepers, their deep connection to the Nexus amplifying her reach. But the Seekers were relentless. As soon as Sarah managed to stabilize one gateway, another would falter. She could feel herself tiring, the strain of maintaining such a vast connection taking its toll. Just when it seemed the task might be too much, Sarah felt a new surge of energy. Opening her eyes, she saw Shadow standing before her, his coat blazing with starlight. The magnificent horse touched his muzzle to her hand, and suddenly Sarah's awareness expanded exponentially. Through Shadow's connection, Sarah could perceive the energy flow with crystal clarity. She saw not just the immediate network of the Nexus, but the vast cosmic tapestry of which it was a part. Galaxies swirled in the distance, each star a point of light in the great web of existence. With this new perspective, Sarah understood what needed to be done. Instead of fighting each incursion individually, she began to work on a larger scale, harmonizing the entire energy field. Her thoughts became a symphony, conducting the flow of life itself. The Seekers' attacks, potent as they were, began to falter in the face of this cosmic harmony. One by one, the red indicators on the holographic displays winked out, replaced by the steady pulse of stabilized energy. As the last gateway was secured, a cheer went up from the keepers. But Sarah, still deep in her connection with the energy, sensed that their work wasn't finished. "The Seekers," she said, her voice distant and echoing with power. "I can feel them. They're lost, misguided. They're seeking something they don't understand." Ilara stepped forward, her eyes wide with realization. "You're right. They're not our enemies. They're part of the balance, just like us. They just don't know it yet." With a surge of compassion, Sarah extended her awareness towards the Seekers. She felt their confusion, their fear, their desperate desire for understanding. And with gentle, healing energy, she reached out to them. To everyone's amazement, the energy field began to shift. The barriers between realms didn't collapse, but became more permeable, more interconnected. The Nexus was transforming, evolving into something new and wonderful. As the transformation completed, Sarah slowly came back to herself. She opened her eyes to find the control chamber filled with soft, golden light. The holographic displays showed a network of energy more vibrant and stable than ever before. Theodore and William were the first to approach her, tears of joy in their eyes. "You did it, Sarah," Theodore said, his voice choked with emotion. "You've brought balance in a way we never thought possible." Ilara nodded, her face radiant with wonder. "You didn't just repel the Seekers, you've helped create a new paradigm, a way for knowledge and understanding to flow between realms without compromising the essential balance." As the implications of what had happened sank in, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Shadow nuzzled her gently, lending her strength. "What happens now?" she asked, looking around at the faces of her new friends and allies. Ilara smiled. "Now, we begin a new chapter. There's so much to learn, so much to explore. And you, Sarah, will play a crucial role in shaping this new future." William nodded in agreement. The prophecy spoke of bridging the gap between old world and new. That's exactly what you've done. As Sarah contemplated this new reality, she thought of the life she'd left behind, her job at the hospital, her friends and family. But looking at Shadow, at Theodore and William, at Ilara and the other keepers, she realized that she had found a new purpose, a new family. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with determination and hope. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready to face it." As the group gathered around her, sharing in the joy and wonder of the moment, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of an even greater adventure. The barriers between realms had been transformed, new understandings were dawning, and the future was bright with possibilities. Sarah Johnson, nurse, healer, and now guardian of the cosmic balance, stood at the threshold of a new era. With Shadow by her side and her newfound family around her, she was prepared to step into that future, ready to heal, to learn, and to help guide the interconnected realms towards a harmonious tomorrow. As the golden light of the transformed nexus bathed them all, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The adventure that had begun with a mysterious horse in a Connecticut hospital had led her to this moment, a moment of triumph, of unity, and of boundless potential. The story of the nexus, of Shadow, of the Seekers and the Keepers was far from over. But now it would be a story of cooperation rather than conflict, of understanding rather than fear. And Sarah, with her compassionate heart and healing hands, would be at the center of it all, helping to write the next chapters in this cosmic tale. As she looked out at the shimmering energies of the transformed nexus, Sarah smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be.